it up to the audience. Will be about 20 minutes.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for being here, everyone. I thought I'd start with a question for Allison. I just found out that LA County is considered the birdiest county in the U.S. Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about why that is?
Absolutely, yeah. So we say that we're the birdiest county here because there have been more species of birds recorded here in LA County than any other county in the U.S. So that means like there are birds that the birds that live in the desert are different than the birds that live in the mountains and the birds that live in near streams and rivers. And so because we actually have all of that diversity here in Los Angeles, that means we have all of the birds associated with those habitats. So it's really the diversity of the landscape in LA that leads to the diversity of birds that we have here. And we also, because we're on one of the major flyways, migration routes, just like in the play, we were listening to some migrating birds. We also get birds that will migrate through, and then sometimes you get birds that migrate through that maybe you're not supposed to migrate through. So we get some birds that kind of get off their trail and will end up in like the Channel Islands or other places like that. So we'll report them here.
So cool. That's incredible. So since we have like that amazing kind of setting, the next question is for the actors, maybe the director too. Did you guys get into birding at all, preparing for this show? If not, what did you do to prepare for this show? Emotionally or bird-wise?
This past summer I did Shakespeare in the Park, or in Griffith Park. And so I was spending a lot more time outdoors because I'm a real indoor type gal. But I was spending a lot more time like looking at birds, and it was great because I knew this play was coming up, that I'd get there a little early and check out the birds. I didn't know what they were, but I was just, more aware of them just because I was doing this play, and I was like, wow, I really don't know anything about birds, but they're so beautiful, and I got to see some cool ones. I don't know what they were, but I'm sure they were so rare and so great. Yeah.
Let's see. A little bit. Right outside my. I live in a second floor apartment, and right outside my window there's a honeysuckle, and it's like it's like Coachella in the morning, and a lot of I guess they're Allen hummingbirds. They're amazing. Neighbor here who may know what I'm talking about, but also it was a great resource going online, finding images. The Cornell site is fantastic. These beautiful photographs that you can cleverly capture and print and then put up all around your apartment, so that you know a tufted titmouse from a scarlet tanager, and just sort of learned it that way.
Yeah, and I spent much of the summer in Maine this year, and when I was prepping for the show, I downloaded a birding app and experimented. I hadn't been a birder prior to that, so I just got my feet wet just to get a sense of it, and then. Yeah, as we were in table work for the show, we had a really great field guide that had very detailed information about each bird. So when a bird was mentioned in the show, we would turn to that page and sort of look at what they look like and learn about them that way, which is really, really great.
That's so cool. That kind of goes right into my next question, which is for our playwright. How did you pick? We've got tufted titmouse, we've got nuthatch, hawk, woodpecker, bluebird. How did you pick the birds that were going to go into the play? And I guess, like, what's your relationship with birding? Did it teach you anything getting into it for the play?
Yeah, I have an interest in birds and birding. I wouldn't say I'm a birder, but I notice birds and things around me a lot. And I grew up in the Baltimore area where the play is set, so because it was kind of a location that I knew very well, and I knew the birds that were in that region and area because it's where I grew up, and I wasn't allowed to watch television, so I was outside a lot and spent a good amount of time noticing birds. And my dad, while he also is not, he wouldn't call himself a birder, he has an incredible mind to remember lots of things. So he really remembers different types of birds, what they're called, what they sound like, trees, flowers, all kinds of things. So whenever we were doing something, he would notice and point out different birds. So most of the birds in the play are birds that I would be able to recognize what they look like anyway from growing up. And then to fill it out, because I didn't want to just have like 4 birds in the play, I did look at field guides and stuff and pick things that would be in the area and then pick things that would be more rare and exciting for John to see in the play, but would be realistic as something that could happen and not just totally out of left field.
Back to Allison. What are some challenges that our bird populations are facing?
Yeah, well, I really appreciated all the challenges that made it into the play. Climate change is, of course, one major challenge. Birds are declining over the last, 50 years. We've seen a decrease in like a quarter of birds. Like we have a quarter less birds than we ever had. And part of it is, a big part of it is habitat destruction and habitat change. So if birds don't have a place to live, then they can't live anymore. Cats are a big problem, so I appreciate hearing that. Outdoor cats, I'm a lover of cats, don't get me wrong, but outdoor cats, not good for birds, not good for mammals. Chemicals, and of course not just here. This is happening all over the world, and many birds, they'll spend the breeding season here, so we'll see them in the summer, but then they'll spend their winters down where it's warm and it doesn't get cold. And so, when we're thinking about protecting birds, we have to protect them in both places where they're living.
Last question before we open it up. Is there any actionable steps that our audience can take right now to help birds in our bird populations?
Absolutely, yeah. I was just talking about having birds in the tropics and conserving them there. Doing things like buying shade-grown coffee actually is really helpful for birds, because that shade-grown coffee plantations provide a lot more habitat for birds that are wintering there. Keeping your cats inside. If you do put out bird feeders and put out bird baths, which are can be really helpful, especially certain times of the year, just making sure that you clean them. So that they're not spreading disease. Birds can get sick just like we can, and we've actually seen that happen pretty regularly. Less plastic. Basically, the things that are good for the environment are also going to be good for birds. And then just one last thing I'll mention is, one of the ways that we as scientists are understanding what's happening with birds is because of community science, like we see here in the play. Doug was writing down all of the birds that he saw, and so these days we're using those records that everybody keeps. A lot of them these days are through an app called eBird or one called iNaturalist, depending on if you know your birds or if you want to post pictures. iNaturalist is better for that. But that's how we know what's changing, because we now have this time record. We can even go deeper in time using our museum specimens, but we can say, actually, birds are now migrating, 10 days earlier than they used to, but not as fast as trees are flowering. So, we're seeing this mismatch. But, going out and just understanding what you see as community scientists is really helpful for bird populations. One last thing to mention is we have this project called Project Phoenix at the museum right now, where we're trying to understand how smoke events are impacting bird populations. And so we're actually just this first year is wrapping up at the end of October, but we'll be starting up again next summer. So if you go on our website and look up Project Phoenix, you'll find out how you can help record birds just 10 minutes a week, and we'll understand how can we help birds when there's wildfire smoke in the air. So,
Very relevant, unfortunately. Okay, let's open it up to audience questions.
I found it interesting, your Playwright. I think it was terrific, first of all. And I think it was terrific because it explored the intimacy and the lack of intimacy, the ways that intimacy gets turned off was prominent. And one thing I really loved about the play, I think, was reflected by when you said when you grew up you weren't allowed to watch television. And your play is wonderful in all the ways that television is not. Because
Right, television.
The power of silence in your play allows us to see the desires and the killing of intimacy beyond the words. Because you take your time with it and you don't have to fill it up with action. And I thought that was a supreme delight. As beautiful as looking at a beautiful bird, to see how humans interact in such a self-destructive way sometimes that, I mean, you really explored that, and I really want to thank you for that, and the actors too. I mean, you guys, I think it was a must have been a very difficult play because you are, I can't think of a better word, but you're very naked up there, like in music, like when you're taking a solo and there's nobody else behind you. Every sound that you create is heard, and it's very delicate, and I thought it was amazingly good job you both did, really.
Thank you. And I will just to say, it's 100% on the page. It really is, it's an extraordinary play.
That's nice.
Yeah.
You see a hand? Yes.
I enjoyed it very, very much. I enjoyed the writing, production, and the simplicity of it was just terrific. I wanted to know how long you rehearsed it, and if any way you could give us an idea, where did you get the idea to write it about this relationship from this moment of looking at birds?
I'll take the rehearsal question. We rehearsed it for 5 weeks, which is a generous amount of time, although I think the number of hours that we rehearse per week is a little bit less than some other productions. So I think over the course of the 5 weeks, it was sort of a normal length of time of rehearsal before we had our first preview. So, yeah.
In terms of where the idea came from, it's always a group of different factors for me that leads to writing a play. I think I kind of need a lot of things to be all in one place for me to feel like, okay, I know what this thing is. And for this play, I was really interested, for a long time have been interested in writing about climate change, but had never felt like I knew how to write anything that wouldn't feel like most of the stuff that's out there, which feels very didactic, feels like it's speaking to a group of people that would be already agreeing with the author. And so I had for a long time not figured out how to do it. And then I started thinking more about the emotional experience of climate change. And for me, that really unlocked what a play could do, because I feel like that's the aspect of climate change that can't really be written about in the news. It's something that is much more human and coming from a place of being a creature on our planet. And once I started thinking about that, then I really started thinking about relationships between individuals, family members, and the ways in which the same feelings of loss, of things changing, of not being able to go back and undo things can really affect a relationship between people. And then, I try to find the most dramatic relationship you can find, which for me, I felt like parent and child was a really natural choice, and thinking about the span of time of generations of handing off our world to the next generation. So there were just kind of a lot of things that all came together to lead me to choosing these two characters and this setting and this, environment, story environment for them to be in.
Thank you.
I would like to make one comment. The question was asked by the great Christina Avila, who I saw when I was in junior high school in a production of Summer and Smoke with Ronnie Cox.
Twice the same age, wasn't it?
And my experience of that play, that was the moment I went, I want to do that. And it's been my honor to know Christina for about 40 years.
Yes.
You chose a father-daughter relationship. Did you consider a father-son relationship? Or were you drawn right away to the father-daughter?
I chose a father-daughter first. I didn't try any other architecture, but I felt as though I've seen a lot of father-son stories, and I wasn't sure what I had to add to the conversation there. And once I started with Caitlin and John, it really felt like I was getting somewhere, so I kept going. Stuck with it.
Was that drawn from any experience of friends, family? Did that, was that did it germinate from that? Yes.
Certainly aspects of both characters are informed by myself, by my own father, other family members, friends, but it's certainly not, these are not real people that I was like, oh, this I've written someplace where I've heard about a real life event and it has really inspired me to kind of like take the kernel of truth and then, plant that and make a fictional tree. But this one is very, these are fictional characters, but always I try to write from a place of honesty, that it comes from living life and observing people and living in relation to other people.
Yes.
I have a question for the actors. I loved it. And Arye, I think there's something just so appealing about a certain character dynamic where I feel like we know people like this where they're railing against climate change and sort of masking this inner existential angst, but still the character has this some buoyancy, this kind of optimism. I don't know if I'm reading into it, but was that a choice, or how did you pull from your own personal experience for this character?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that it's optimism, but it's that it's love. There are things that he loves.
Probably have time.
That's it. So in any situation, no matter how bad it gets, there can also be like a thing that he loves about the world. And his
We'll
daughter.
do one more. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, to me, the essence of the play was the relationship between the daughter and the father. The birds and the climate change, the climate change was, to me, was barely noticed. It was something I noticed, but it wasn't a very big part of it for me at all. And the birds were just, to me, it seemed a way that let the father and the daughter communicate. But to me, the essence was definitely the relationship between the father and the daughter.
I guess we could do one more.
Yeah, we could do one more question. Yeah.
I found it really interesting, the intergenerational relationships, and especially, I think we tend to think of younger generations as the more liberals, but this felt a little bit flipped on its head. And in different ways, but then socially, when we're talking about women's, abortions or not abortions, but miscarriages and things, it then was flipped again. And I found it really fascinating to track that. And I would love to hear, the choices around that as well.
Yeah, I think that often the way that we, as a society, describe these boxes that we categorize people into are quite limiting and don't take into account the complexity of individuals, and then multiplying that across a population is so difficult. So certainly I would say that there are aspects in which each one of us, if you could sort of take our views on each topic and chart it on a political spectrum, but then eventually if you're just going to talk about a whole person, you're going to just sort of take the average and be like, they're a conservative or they're a liberal or whatever. And I think that with these characters and with a play like this that's set up in this way that really can allow for close viewing of their wholeness, there are just lots of different parts of their lives, and they change so much over the course of time. And so in one aspect, the older character is, more politically liberal, and in other aspects, he's kind of rigid and not seeing the way the world is changing and that the situation changes, so that affects who his daughter feels she can be. So I think one of the things I love so much about writing plays is it allows you to get at that complexity. And I really feel that as while I'm writing and working with talented actors and directors, and we're doing that kind of moment-to-moment work on the play, that as long as there feels an honest progression from moment to moment and from decision to decision that the character is making, then that is like how we go through the world and make our choices and tell our stories to ourselves and to others about who we are. And so I don't tend to worry too much about, plotting the trends of generations onto characters, because I think that's something that's done better in other fields. But one of the great things about theater is that complexity and the contradictions that exist within individual people.
Yeah, I love this. Thank you.
Just one thing to add to that, I do think that there is a generational aspect to Caitlin, where she's born into a generation that tends to think about can tend to think about jobs in a way that is practical and maybe more difficult to be idealistic about it, and because you need a roof over your head, and maybe you're born into a recession or whatever it is. So even more than sort of labeling Caitlin as conservative, I think there's an aspect to her that her practical way of looking at the world, of just doing what she needs to do to be happy and survive, is what then feeds into how she goes through her political life. And I think that can manifest itself in a generational shift, although you can't generalize with everybody, of course.
And she watched her dad dedicate his whole life to something that ultimately failed. So what lesson is there in that, I think, for her? Make that money, honey.